In early spring of 2016, King Peter Blackfire of Malum declared himself the king of all militaries, effectively becoming the first claimant of a ruler of the Graal Military Community. Classic had never seen such a sudden, dramatic, and bold claim. A new gen, former corporal under Sherlock Zor, to upstart dictator in little more than 3 years. The instability of Elwell's regime paved his way to making this declaration, and though he would only hold the entire territory of Classic for a brief period, less than 2 weeks, the aftermath would change the course of the Graal Military Community forever, leaving Classic in turmoil and creating grudges that last until the current day. Weeks after this declaration, the powers that be on the continent of Classic began scheming. 3 cliques formed an unofficial triumvirate, all tasked with the goal to see Astoria's influence weakened. The first were state refugees, made up by disgruntled former officers such as Jin and Pa, but led by former Colonel Zakiev. The second group were Baksayan remnants, led by former nobility Methivus, who had become good friends with the third group. The third group were the successors of the Kingdom of Royce and its successor states, Constantine and his son John, who harbored the deepest grievances against Blackfire, having been at war on and off since 2013. These wars were small, PK hit-and-runs, most often at York. The straw that broke the camel's back, however, was King Blackfire declaring his hegemony over all of Classic, with secret plans of expanding to the Western Isles. These groups formed what was known as the May 21st Revolution, and began preparing for a series of offensives against Malum, designed not to topple the regime, but merely to act as a nuisance. In the early morning of the 21st of May, 4 members of this coalition, Zakiev, Constantine, Methivus, and a mercenary named Dmitri, rode across the York Bridge cheering Primo Victoria in hopes of their first victory. Charging into around 20 Malum soldiers, the charismatic couple of Zakiev and Constantine rallied their friends, with many heeding the call, and thus the revolution began. It truly is best described as a revolution, as the members who came to the aid of the horsemen varied from all backgrounds and political orientations. Members of the state, such as Jin, Irish, and Pa, would assist, along with the talented administrator Zhao, worked hand in hand with Baksayans, Roycians, and others, including small foreign nations such as Calvasia and Paconia, whose homelands were recently occupied by the Malum invader. Coupling artillery glitches and manpower, the revolutionaries were able to hold off Malum for hours, back and forth, with warps occurring. Eventually, on the field of battle, Constantine and Peter agreed to a guild spar, with the revolution winning 3-2 with its elite spar team, affectionately called the Golf Team by Constantine. Malum marched out of York with its guns and flags, though not all was fine. Zakiev was mortally wounded and killed, banned for boosting. After the battle in York Barracks, Constantine and his officers, who now led a host of around 40 members who waved the revolutionary orange, white, and blue, began planning for the next offensive against the tyrant. Malum attempted a probing attack the next day, but swiftly lost. Zhao, a new friend of Constantine, alongside John, Zai, Methivus, Carter, Goose, Dmitri, and more, all called for a centralized state, government, and military to help defend their gains from York. After many calls from his people, Constantine and his followers declared themselves the successors to Sarovia and Royce, forming the new Sarovian Empire, with Constantine taking the title of emperor, officially becoming the third Constantine to rule Sarovia. Within a day, multiple guilds were being made and being filled. They were led by Colonel Jin and Colonel Methivus of the infantry divisions, and Colonel Goose of the artillery division. This funded the emperor the troops and resources to continue his crusade against the Malums. The artillery would pound the battlefield to weaken the enemy troops before the infantry rolled in and crushed them. A week later, the emperor began the initial stages of the Autumnwood campaign, the task to cleanse everything south of the river Nefets from the foe. Malum's homeland was in Destiny and Swamp, so Constantine and his war council decided to attack to destroy the enemy's morale. Constantine's army swept south and engaged the foe at the Gates of Destiny, which fought for just under 6 hours. The two sides were unrelenting and uncompromising, with the fiercest fighting getting the area warped. Under the recommendation of the talented Chancellor Zhao, the Treaty of Tells was proposed to King Blackfire. This treaty was simple. In summary, no battle would last longer than 3 hours. Should a battle last longer, both sides were mandated to engage in a guild spar. It was accepted by Blackfire. The treaty was risky. Malum had the noble family of Valeria, one known for their good fighters, but the Emperor had something up his sleeve and decided to call upon the golf team once more. Equipped with multiple professional spars from GST teams, they swept through battles after every 3-hour time period was up. After the Malums were defeated at Autumnwood, they fled to Swamp, which would give way to the decisive battle of the entire Saro-Malum War. Constantine sent a battalion of his unique guards, draped in their unique red uniforms, and climbed the Swamp ridgeline. Malum scouts observed this and pulled the entire Malum force to Swamp, which outnumbered Constantine III 3-1. As soon as this happened, Colonel Mathevus stormed into Onnet with 2 battalions of Sarovians and quickly crushed the Malum garrison, which retreated to Maud. Mathevus' battalions likewise captured Snow uncontested and then held the defensive line. Realizing the unattainable position of his army, Blackfire marched out of Swamp to hold his own line at Maud and the castle, ceding Swamp to Constantine. As the Malums fled, Prince John asked Constantine if they should take prisoners and interrogate them about their strategy, and whether or not Blackfire's retreat was fake. Constantine responded to John with, "No prisoners, only trophies." On the 1st of June, the Battle of Les Deux Fronts began. A full force of 40 men split up between Emperor Constantine III and Prince John to pincher the Malums, hoping to make one of the flanks give up and then swarm them. Constantine brought the first army to the castle to preoccupy and siege the Malums, and John headed north. Both Malum flanks held firm until the battle waged on for 6 hours, when the Malums conducted a brilliant fighting withdrawal to the castle to throw everything they had against the Sarovians. The entire Sarovian force was thrown against the castle. The battle raged for another hour until the 3-hour mark, where Emperor Constantine led his golf team to victory in person, effectively ending any resistance. The decisive battle of Les Deux Fronts crippled Malum, leaving Blackfire exiling himself. On the 5th of June, the region of Malum, Azrael, surrendered to Constantine and was assimilated into Sarovia, forming a division full of Malum refugees. This was an example of the extreme generosity that the Emperor bestowed to his vanquished foes, though over time he would become more cold and calculated. Shortly after, Emperor Constantine III passed away peacefully due to an account ban, giving way to Constantine IV. With the war against Malum over, the Sarovian tricolor flew over the classic continent. The Emperor and his nobles turned to administration with a fervor unseen since the days of the state before. Prince John was quoted to say, "If the Emperor was an excellent commander, which he was an even better manager." Nicknamed by his officers as the Sarovian Bear, he set to establishing new institutions. The Emperor began multiple new programs like the War Bonds program, which funded uniforms and gear to increase their campaigns against enemy insurgents. This raised over 30,000 graalets in 3 weeks, where 8,000 went to new equipment and the rest went to uniforms, and enough for a mount for a good friend of the Emperor and veteran of his state infantry unit, Private Ares. The Emperor also planned an expeditionary corps to travel to the west, which was a decent success. The Emperor personally went to the west with some officer staff and formed a navy there. There resided the so-called Dragon of the West, Kevlar Vaughn. The two forces never had a full-blown battle, but Rear Admiral Crockett skirmished with Kevlar and won. The Dragon and the Bear met once, which Kevlar told Constantine to leave the west to him and be more cautious with an upcoming war in Classic. Words were exchanged, but no bullets. The Emperor still deemed Kevlar as the upstart which fled Royce the year prior. The expeditionary force retreated when the Emperor focused all forces on an upcoming campaign against the United Forces, led by Alwell loyalists who were disgruntled at Sarovian prosecution of Stades. The United Forces seized Big City and sent probing attacks to all Sarovian territories, which were promptly defeated by the garrisons there. Soon after, an official war declaration was sent from Alwell to Constantine. The United Forces were knocked out of the war insanely early with the decisive victory in Maud, which led to Alwell and his court fleeing into obscurity. The two nations resolved peace by arranging a wedding between Prince John of Sarovia and Princess Rin of the United Forces. However, the marriage was an ambush, and the United Forces were slaughtered. With Logan in captivity, he formally surrendered the next day. In honor of this victory, the Royal Guards were elevated to the Imperial Guard, and Chancellor Zhao raised 10,000 graalets to be funded to build on map bases, Mirage, and Drayden. All of these new programs brought the Emperor to age though. After months of ruling, the ailing Emperor Constantine IV met with his newly established Senate to discuss who would succeed him. The Senate elected Prince Corey over the Crown Prince, and as tensions boiled, the two brothers went for each other's throats, starting a massive civil war. Next episode, we will cover the Sarovian Civil War, the remnants of the Sarovian Guard Division in the Saro-Orayan War, and the Flight of Poltava, from October 2016 to January 2018. Stay tuned and subscribe to the Sarovian Pathé for more history videos.